Tom, welcome to the Wade Champions. Jerry and I are honored to have you on, and we've just been chatting away here before we got started. And it was already one of those conversations where I almost forget to hit record and actually start recording the conversation. So thanks for coming on.
It's my pleasure, and it's an honor as well. And with two great leaders, I'm looking forward to what I can learn here.
Well, it's really interesting. This summer we've had a lot of people from the ice hockey world because clearly it's the off season. We recently had Scott Allen from the Capitals. We had Mike Potenza, the head of performance for the Sharks. I've been in touch with people that I know in the hockey world. It seems like they all come out of their bubble in the summer and they're like, here I am. And then they disappear again in about a month. Um,
That's exactly
so yeah. But it's just really interesting. You are one of a number of coaches that Jerry and I have gotten to speak to recently who had this long and distinguished career in coaching. You were an NHL head coach on three different occasions, um, and yet here you are after that, really focused on mental health and well-being of the humans in front of you. Why do you think we don't talk about that and get that at the beginning of our career?
Yeah, great question, John. I guess we have to ask ourselves, what is the beginning of a career?
Yeah.
Um, is it a professional career? Is it a youth hockey career? Is it somewhere in between? I believe we're in the experience industry, if we could coin a phrase. We're in the experience industry, and our obligation there is to make the experience second to none. And so with that being said, let's go back to when you're a youth player and in any sport, for example, and why did you go to the pitch, or why did you go to the gym, or why did you go to the arena? And for the most part, it was about the fun that is incumbent with participation in every single manner. But also, you enjoyed being there and being around friends and whatnot. It was social, and the leadership. We all hope and would understand that that was part of why you wanted to go. You were learning things. You had you have an intrinsic motivation and you have an extrinsic motivation. And from an intrinsic point of view, those of us in sport would watch, the big leagues, we would want to be that great baseball player, that great football player, or that great hockey player. And yet when we got to the rink, all we ever experienced was fun. And we sort of had our eye on this prize, as long a journey as it might be, and really in many cases, not unrealistic, I should say. And that's where we step in. And I've been able to carry that. I can name my minor hockey coaches. I can name the colors of our jerseys, and I can name the name, and I can name the team name. And that's 62 years ago. I can also name my grade school teachers. I can remember them, and the question I ask myself is why.
Mm.
And so when I ask myself the real why, they were nurturers, they were teachers, they were kind, they cared enough to make sure that I was delivered, the consequence as required in a manner that did not interrupt my self-esteem or my growth or perform in any way that was disrespectful. And so that's kind of how I've led my whole life. And when it came to sport, that was kind of my bedrock. And quite honestly, fellas, I think that approach got me jobs, and maybe, at the professional level at a point in time cost me a job
Mm,
or two or three.
mm.
But I'm okay with that. It was my
Yeah.
value system. It was what was important to me, guys. And so I know that players, they didn't have to like me, they had to like playing for me.
Mm,
So that's kind of the dichotomy that we live in, is that, we have to be this way, we have to be, very, very fundamentally strong, sure, but we also had to deliver the heavy consequence and make sure that everyone got that message, in many cases, including the media. And I never worked that way.
yeah.
My job was to make sure that my players, um, you know, felt the rink was a destination.
Mm,
And that was important to me, as should the school classroom be. Should the workplace be. It should be someplace that you actually want to get to because you enjoy the experience. And there's also some some tough love in there as well, but that we
Do you
all.
think you got lucky as a young kid? Because I mean, there's plenty of people who'd be like, man,
Yeah.
my coaches were miserable or whatever. I don't know a ton of people who are like, my kindergarten teacher was a cruel mistress. Like, no one really says that. Like, people gravitate towards that with the right personality, but certainly many, what you would in Canada call minor coaches across sports, and we would
Right.
call youth coaches here, like
Right.
they shouldn't be anywhere near 8-year-olds,
Yeah.
right? They're
Yeah.
coaching like you're 28-year-olds, and so your memory sounds like you got very lucky along the way. Not like you never had someone who wasn't as good, but you had enough good ones that gave you the love and gave you the skills and all that to stick with it in both school and sport. In school, we can always turn to, well, why'd you major in history? Because I had this incredible history teacher in high school or whatever. And why'd you follow hockey? Well, I had these incredible coaches. I mean, like I feel like there's more people who would say the opposite of what you said.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot, and too many, that's for sure. But I also think that in itself has opportunity with it.
Yeah.
Now, as a young 6 or 7 youth hockey player, that's a little more difficult to digest and kind of assimilate and
Hmm.
regurgitate the good from all of that, which for those little people is kind of fleeting. Uh,
Hmm.
but I think at the same time, that's why I think there's a coalition that's required here. Um, Parents, education, the school system, for example, and then there's the discretionary time that children have or kids have or whatever, which we hope would be athletics because we believe in it. But to me, there's that little trio,
Hmm.
that have to collaborate in order to make sure that all experiences have value, even the tough ones.
Yes.
So if you've had a tough time at basketball, with your coach who drives hard and has a penchant for winning, makes it pretty tough. Being able to come home and identify with that and have those conversations is important.
Hmm.
Being able to go to school and, when the teacher asks what was your weekend all about, being able to describe that. But I do believe that there needs to be a coalition of the willing in terms of growing our kids, not just in sport, but through sport, to be the best version of themselves, as the saying goes. So I was lucky. Yes, I was. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia. It seemed like the interface between kids and parents and sport leaders, for example, and educators was that much more intimate.
Hmm.
Whereas in a larger center, maybe less so. It doesn't mean that the ideology is any different. We all want to do our best and make sure that the legacy that we might leave behind, will go out and perform great things in life as well. But that doesn't always happen. And,
Yeah.
we are a product of our environments. And that coach that maybe doesn't quite get it right would have been a product of something along those lines too, I believe. So we have to mitigate that. And that's
Yeah.
all I've ever tried to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, he or she is that way for some reason, right? They were formed by that. How support like a lot of the conversations Jerry and I have around, let's just put it around this like quote kids these days, right? you know, I feel like maybe your parents, my parents, certainly Jerry's parents growing up, like when you had that demanding coach, when you had that difficult situation, the parental reaction wasn't, well, first of all, your parents probably weren't on the sideline watching every practice. And then, the parental reaction wasn't, oh my God, we got to get rid of that coach. Oh my God, we have to intervene. It was more like, well, were they right? Tough it out. This is a good lesson, and go talk to your coach. Solve your problem. Whereas now the reaction is more how to mow down the obstacle in the way, which happens to be the coach in this moment. So, what were your parents like? How did that shape you and shape your own parenting in terms of dealing with that hard coach who got you out of your comfort zone?
What a great statement, and I'm not surprised that I'm sure Jerry, your parents were the same as yours, John, and likely mine. My dad worked at the Canadian Pacific Railroad, so he was a railway man. He worked shift work, so for 2 weeks it was midnight, and the next 2 weeks it was 8 to 4. My mom was stayed at home, but ended up, who started to work. They understood the value of athletics and sport. Both were quite athletic in their day growing up and quite accomplished. But with that being said, as I mentioned, I can name all of my youth hockey coaches, none of whom were Joe Renney, the greatest man that ever lived. So they gave of themselves to nurture us, and that really stuck with me. So I guess I was lucky there. But yes, we seem to use this sort of this cancel culture thing to eliminate, the hurdles, the
Hmm.
obstacles and whatnot. And so I think the big thing, and my parents were very much like that. My dad was a laborer man. He ended up being a painter beyond that. And I worked with my father on at the school board and for another man who I hold dearly in my heart for what he gave to me, and that was responsibility. Not just for myself, but for a little crew that I hired every summer, to work as the laborers. And that level of responsibility, along with my parents saying, go talk to your coach, or talk to your manager. Don't go in and with your hat in your hand, go in and tell them exactly how you feel. If you'd like to play a different position, explain to them why. And if it's because you don't see the game a particular way, or you're not having fun with where you are, just have that conversation. You're going to learn as much from the conversation as you will from participating. So it was very much like that. And my dad was a pretty hardcore guy, fought in the Second World War. So that ideology of coming back and we all know that PTSD was very much a function of wartime and number one and number two as well. We just didn't identify it with that way.
Hmm.
But Joe was a great guy. He was a great man, and he taught us resiliency and a level of resolve, taking responsibility for that which we owned. And if there's a problem with a coach, you might have some ownership there, and my dad was very much aware of that and was able to help us understand what that might be. And the only way to straighten it out was to go to the source. And my mom was, she was the nurturer, no question about that. So she always had, her arm around your shoulder, but she was a tough gal, in
Hmm.
her own way, but very empathetic. And I think I have that certainly in me as a leader, if you will. So yeah, I think that we've got to understand that, moving forward in athletics, we still have to recognize the value of um, character in our leadership. If we want to identify and build character in our troops, in the kids that we're working with, or men that we're working with, or women that we're working with, we have to recognize what character means to us, and that it's not just something you say, it's something you do. And that involves humility and integrity and a level of empathy and courage and all of those things, some level of transparency, if you will, collaboration, all of that. But it also means the kind truth. And I say kind truth because I think the days of hammering your hand on the table and demanding a better performance and here's why and whatnot and using language that's not necessarily appropriate for your age group, I I don't see that working. Yeah, but I
Hmm.
do see demonstrating your own level of character and
Hmm.
giving someone a beacon of which to identify with as they grow and go through their experience, making it. I had players in the National Hockey League come to me in three different teams and say, Tom, can we talk about my situation? And
Hmm.
I'd say, sure, by all means. And it wasn't, I need more ice time. It wasn't, I don't like who I'm playing with. It was, you need to know that I suffer from depression or I have anxiety, or I have, distress disorder. They were telling me in a moment in time in their lives where their earning power was this long
Hmm.
of millions of dollars. And they came to me to describe to me, this is what I'm taking. And my response was, thanks, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'm mindful of it. Let's go play.
Hmm.
And in no way, shape, or form do you hold people hostage for being that honest. Um,
Yeah. Go
you
ahead.
just make
Finish. Yeah.
sure they get the same opportunity as everybody else. And that was where I think that cemented my relationship with my players in many ways because I was pretty straight up and very open and still at the same time coached.
Yeah. Jerry, please. That just makes me think, Jerry, of all the conversations we've had with, coaches who have coached at your level, Tom, and been world champions and national champions, and regardless of sport, who talk about these individual conversations. The Mike Potenza from the Sharks said to us, right, Jerry, is like the most important coaching tool is a couch, just to sit down and have these conversations. So Jerry, like jump in here because I know you want to really dive into that area, that these are people first and not hockey players.
Well, I think, yeah, thank you, John. Tom, it's a pleasure having you here, speaking the way you're speaking, having coached at the level you're coaching, because your influence is going to be very powerful for a lot of our younger coaches. I think a lot of younger coaches that listen, they don't understand uh, what you're talking about, but when they hear it from you, they're going to think about it. I just published one of my books. It's called Lead with Love. I think you'd enjoy it a lot. It's
I'm familiar.
Are you? Well, in that book, first of all, the definition is it's not that kumbaya moment, and it's an opportunity to prioritize people over the game itself. It's demonstrating caring and empowering each other. But one of the definitions of love in that book is we demand from those we lead what is needed to become the best version of ourselves. And we do that by helping the people feel like they belong, like they're important, like they're relevant, and they're respected. Uh, okay, so with that as a foundation, it seems to me that what comes first is the people feeling important, relevant, and valued, and then you can demand all you want from them. I had a father who was a battalion chief in the New York City Fire Department,
Cool.
and right, and it sort of sounded a little bit like your dad.
Oh, yeah.
And God, he was a tough little guy, 5'7", and they totally respected this guy. And at 12, I noticed when I used to go to work with him and watch his behaviors, they all resonated with me for some reason. And later on, I identified what it was. This man would lay a foundation of love.
Yeah.
Everyone in that firehouse knew that he loved them and he cared for them and he respected them when they would come like your athletes did to you and say, "I want to talk. My wife's having a hard time, blah blah blah." And he was there. He, as John said, he had the couch for them. That was the foundation. But boy, let it be known that he demanded an awful lot from these men. And and to the point where they never wanted to trip him up. They never wanted to play any crazy games with him because they were afraid. They were afraid that he would lay into them. But the beauty of that laying into that athlete was he always used good language.
Yeah.
He would never denigrate. He would develop them as workers, as firefighters, and he would honor them, but at the same time he would be really tough on them. And so good to hear you say that. And I'm just wondering if you have a reaction to that, or
Oh, do I ever? First of all, my dad was 5'7". He was a Golden Gloves boxing champion in the Army. And he worked shift work. And I just love the man. And he would just have to touch his belt. He never took it off. He would just touch his belt, and the three boys would be gone.
Mhm.
But so that is so true. And I'm going to be anecdotal if it's okay, John and Jerry, with just
sure, yeah, this is
this is really interesting because I coached the Kamloops Blazers, which is major junior hockey in Canada, and the highest level of junior hockey that you can play in our country. And I had a player that is now a player agent, and this is a few years ago now. And we were chatting one day and reminiscing and having lots of laughs and lots of fun. And he said, "Tom, you know what I remember?" He says, "I remember being really, really good to us, and you were, an important change for what we had had as a coach prior to that." But he says, "I'll never forget the time you came into the dressing room after your period, and you looked at me, and I did swear, Jerry." And I remember this like it was yesterday, and he certainly reminded me of it. But he said, "You are not Bobby Orr." and because he was turning pucks over left, right, and center. And here we are, fellas, 50 some odd years later, and he remembered that.
Mm,
And believe me, I did everything I could, as a coach to be who I am, be authentic and who I am, and deliver the message and the consequence, et cetera, and love my players, really and truly. And that's not a stretch and a word that's not maybe used enough when it comes to how we treat our players in athletics, girls and boys. But he remembered that, and it changed our conversation. I didn't apologize and fall all over myself. I just said, geez, I'm sorry I came across that way. But I do recall that. And yeah, it's too bad that happened. But I've certainly must have learned from it because I don't coach that way. And he says,
Mhm.
I know that. He said, I thought it was kind of funny. And yet, okay, how funny is that when 50 years later he's reminding me about the conversation?
Mhm.
So very good point. And I think that with that being said, I've told players I love them. I've told my team I love them.
Mhm.
I've told people in my workplace that I love them. And it's not terminology to make it all warm and fuzzy and the kumbaya thing like you're talking about, Jerry. It's real. And I think, they come to know that because it's consistent, along with the delivery of responsibility, along with the delivery of accountability, of also taking it yourself and owning your own stuff as a coach in front of and with them.
Mhm.
They say, this is for real.
Mhm.
This is for real. This person in front of us is willing to take responsibility for something that he did or didn't do. And I want to play for this guy. And it's not a stretch. And I think, everyone talks about this day and age and athletes today, et cetera. Sure, there are all kinds of extrinsic, pressures on kids nowadays. No different than they were on us. They were just different. But the bottom line is that they have those types of pressures, and we have to make sure that we're aware of that, and that we identify with a couple of really important intangibles, as leaders. And one of them is a sense of timing. One of them is I call it charisma, and I don't mean that in the way that might come across for most of the population. Think, oh, you know, no, it's having that ability to walk into a room and have instant respect and have the people there wanting to hear from you without even having to open your mouth. So timing and charisma are really important as far as the intangibles that I mentioned. And to me, just having that gut feel,
yeah.
that.
You talk about telling people you love them and what have you. Of course, in our world, you got to have what they call healthy cultural paranoia.
Mhm.
I mean, you have a group of 10-year-old girls, you're not going to be going around telling them I love you. And I want coaches to understand that.
You
But
bet.
it's not so much saying the word I love you, or what I like to do is I like to say, uh, listen, I love the way you show up early for practice. And then I'll go to another athlete and say, you know what? I love how you stay late after practice and help clean up. And that really sends a great message to the team. So instead of using the word love, which tends to be loaded for a lot of people,
For sure.
for the younger people, I kind of couch it in what I love about them. So I'm giving them specific behaviors. But back to that thing about love with coaches. Let's say I work a lot with the college and the pro level. That's my population of people, there's still a lot of fear on the part of coaches with this idea of connecting and caring and demonstrating that.
Mhm.
And there, I think, when I ask them, I said, "What are you afraid of?" They're afraid of losing control.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, it's all about control, isn't it? It's
Mhm.
like, God, if they'll think I'm soft, they'll think I'm this, I'll think I'm that. And the other part of it is the other response is why they're not showing that love is they don't know how to do it.
Exactly. And
You know?
maybe they've ever had it, never experienced it.
Right, exactly.
Or if they have, certainly in a much different way. I love the way you identified with love and love the activity or the action or the effort, whatever that. I think that's really, really, really wise.
Yeah, because they still get the message that, you must really care about them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. I think you're right. I think there's two things involved: the higher or the further you go along in your coaching career. Too. One is is safety and maybe being able to maintain your position and keep your job. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's unfortunate, but as the further you go along, that is a reality. It doesn't need to change you. Doesn't need to change you at all. And that's why we have staffs. Everyone's DNA is somewhat different. We don't all identify with empathy. We don't all identify with collaboration. We don't all identify with sort of the data driven game
Yeah.
nowadays. But with staffs, even if it's one other person, you share that responsibility and you can work with each other in combination and then do that collaboration that's so important when we lead, people in general. And I think it's also important to know what you don't know, and understand what you could be better at and work at it. We are a work in progress from day one, and
Mm.
I think that I can tell you when I was in Vancouver, I had coached the Canadian national team. I had coached in the Lillehammer Olympics, against a great U.S. team, by the way, who we were most fearful of. And we played in the last game of the competition against Sweden and lost in the shootout and won the silver medal. You don't win silver, but we've certainly felt what you did. But I went to Vancouver and I had some success. I'd won in Kamloops and won a Memorial Cup there, a national championship, and et cetera, et cetera. That's all irrelevant. But I went to Vancouver and my practices were great. I thought we had a great system. The players even suggested that. As time went on, early in my first year, within probably 2 months, I could see the guys starting to kind of look at me sideways. And I'm
Mm.
thinking, what did I miss here? I treated them well. I was hard when I needed to be. We had a good system. I had a veteran team that had been to the Stanley Cup final 2 years earlier against New York. And as it turns out, the following year I was relieved of my duties. So I did some exit interviews with some of the guys. More than one said, "Tom, you're ahead of your time," which I believe I probably was.
Yeah.
But I also was late to the game. These were adult players who had families or significant others. They had children's or extended families. They needed time away from the rink. They needed time away from me. They needed time to go have fun themselves. And I was boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, because with my experience up to that point in time, that's what I knew. I'm the same person today as I was back then, but I missed the boat. I did not understand the group. I did not take the time to really dig into what they required beyond hockey. I assumed because we're professionals, we're in the NHL, we play 82 times. This is how we do it until the end of June.
Right, we're robots. Yeah.
And I missed. I
Yeah.
missed a big way. And then the next time my coach was in New York, and it went quite well, all things considered. We never got close to a Stanley Cup, but we started winning when they hadn't been before.
Yeah.
And I have players like Jaromir Jagr and Tom Pody and Michael Nylander and Henrik Lundqvist saying this has been the best time I've ever had at a rink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because I knew how to let them, where to draw the line.
You know
It's
what I notice? I've been working with doing some consulting work with the Sharks organization here
Mhm.
in San Jose, and uh, I'm not used to the hockey world. It's a new world to me.
Mhm.
Sports isn't, and all the things we're talking about, that's my craft. But this experience that I had is this. So I work with professional soccer. We play in professional soccer one game a week,
Right.
period. Basketball, maybe you play 3 games a week, mostly 2 games a week.
Mhm.
You go to hockey, it's like brutal. It's almost every other day, or sometimes back to back, or at least every other day. My frustration and a frustration of the staff is we just there just wasn't enough time to give to these athletes what they really needed. They needed time. They need 3 or 4 days in between a game where they could process things, or they could sit down and, as John said, use the tool of the couch, sit
Mhm.
down and have a conversation about what's going on. And there's no way to change that, is there? I mean, it's a really brutal sport, and
It
it's one of
is, it is, Jerry.
it's one of the toughest trophies to win, isn't it? The Stanley Cup.
Well, it is, that's for sure, because you're playing for 2 more months
Yeah,
after the regular season to play the last game,
yeah,
whenever that might be. And you're right. And And the athletes in San Jose, as they would be in any other NHL franchises, these guys do have families
Ah,
or girlfriends, or even your trainers, and and the women around these franchises are as important as any individual that exists within that staff. They are absolutely huge, and we have to honor that, and we have to respect that, and we have to give opportunities for that interchange as well, for that interaction. And when you think about it, 82 times, 3 times a week, most often, it's a contact game. The NFL, which I love watching, plays once a week.
hmm.
They don't practice Mondays. They spend time in the classroom for sure, yes, but they play once a week and it's physical.
And not everybody gets in the game.
No, no, they don't. And there's a depth chart there,
Right.
and so in hockey, everybody plays. It's one of the
Yeah.
few games that changes on the fly. In other words, without a stoppage, they just keep going. And you might have a short skate the next day. You might just do dry land or off ice training. More than likely, you're going to come and practice again and
Mhm.
then get ready for the next game. So that opportunity to have that ability to communicate with your athletes is really, really a fine line.
Yeah.
And you've got to be very creative on how to do that. Sure, there's no question technology can help us, but I can tell you right now, I'm thinking this is probably a different podcast if we're not on screen, if what we're doing is just talking to each other. This is enormous,
Yeah.
and it's technology still. So yeah, I think, Jerry, the only thing we can do is make sure that we use our staff accordingly, make sure that we understand what's going on in their worlds without prying, without going across the line, but ever making sure that even in that short skate or that time on the bench, and for someone like yourself walking down the hallway after a practice and catching up to a player, that contact is absolutely essential. If it's 30 seconds or 30 minutes, it's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And I think, the thing to do is to make sure that through staff, we've connected with people, some type of a communication matrix. Got to this one today. I want to get to that one, and that one tomorrow. Jim, you've got so and so and so and so. I know so and so is going to see Mike today about his future. I've got to make sure I talk to him on Thursday. You should strategize that, and to make sure that we do have a level of communication that is consistent.
You know,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
yeah, Tom, when you first mentioned that story about connecting with these players and everything, it just brought me back to a podcast Jerry and I did a while back with Steve Kerr. And Jerry, I don't know if you remember this. He was just talking about, sort of the big picture is knowing that everyone on your roster needs something different. He's like, so Steph Curry has so many demands on his time that the way I coach Steph is he's like, he told us the story about just leaving a little note in his locker saying, hey, you're being called here or there. Make sure you take some time to go play some golf and to go hang out with your wife and the kids and have good dinner. Don't let everyone take over your life. And he said, Steph came back the next day and said, I read that note at dinner, with my family and we were in tears because that was the permission I needed to say no to things. And he's like, Steph is very different than the 14th guy in the roster who's not sure if he's ever getting another contract, and this could be it. They need
Yeah.
something different from me. It's not a one size fits all. And so I think it's really interesting how you evolved as a coach from, I'm being this nice quality great guy, but I'm not truly connected because I haven't got to know them yet to, in with the Rangers, like I'm going to get to know them first, right? And then this is more of a statement I want you to reflect on. And then in professional sport, the hardest part is the window is getting shorter and shorter for a coach to show that they're getting something done. And the owner and the fans only look at that in the win and loss column. But I can't form a deep relationship with someone overnight. I need time. And that's why I think the ones that can have this longevity with a coach, that can weather the ups and downs, but the coach is building these incredible relationships that the players trust him and they know that he or she's in it for them. And so just reflect on that because pro sport is moving in a, and I've had friends who have coached at Manchester United, right? Where you get like a month
Yeah.
and they want your head, right?
Yeah.
Well, what can you do in a month except something tactical and hope you get a few wins that buys you enough time to actually know the name of my players' wives?
I think we all understand the value of winning on the scoreboard,
Hmm.
or the size of a paycheck, or the crowd's response, good or bad. I've always come to the arena from the point of view of winning for me is making sure these guys really and truly felt that this was the place to be. I've just spent the best 2 hours I could possibly spend today. And that's always the win. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've gotten jobs because of my approach, and I've lost them because of my approach. I wanted to win as well, but I wanted to win for the players. I wanted to make sure that I measured winning by the improvement in an athlete, by his interpersonal decisions in the dressing room, by how he carried himself on the bench, how he decided to train. I always felt that yes, the Stanley Cup is the coup de grace for hockey. So too is an Olympic gold medal, for example, all of which I pursued, but I did not have anywhere near the motivation to do that as I did to make sure my players knew they were cared about, cared for, and that was the win for me. The win for me was making sure that people improved, that they knew that I didn't just care about them, I cared about their home life. And I also cared about their level of participation and how relevant they felt, at the end of the day. And to me, that's always been the win, always.
So, John, let me just jump in here for a second. Tom, I've done some research on your work, and one of the things that props up is you had some specific ways that I think would really be helpful to our listeners to attack this idea of the mental wellness piece and the relationship piece and building that kind of foundation. One of them, and maybe you could just sort of talk a little bit about this, is the you talk about daily mental wellness check-ins.
Mhm.
Daily mental wellness check-ins. Talk about that a little, will you?
Sure. We can talk about mental health and we can talk about mental wellness. They certainly are, they're side by each. But mental wellness for me is making sure that you have spent 30 seconds, identifying the room, getting that feel for the room, and understanding how people are doing that level of interaction. Are they energy givers today? Are they energy takers? I'm a source of a lot of things, whether I want to be or not. I'm the source of motivation, inspiration, information. I'm the source of accountability. I'm a source of responsibility. I'm all those things. But first and foremost, I'm a person. I'm a person just like they are, and I pack daily the same things that they do. And I think when we talk about mental wellness, what we're trying to do is maximize everyone's potential. And when we talk about mental wellness, it really does, in fact, I've always felt that happiness is a competitive advantage. And to come in with that frame of mind and to be able to provide that to your players is important. But also you have to be consistent with that. And they have to be somewhat predictable in a way that they know what they're going to get from Tom today. And I will circle around the room and I will just, talk to guys for 10 seconds. How was your night last night? What did you think of our performance last night or whatever? Anything to make sure they know that I continue to be accessible. And then from that point on, we pay very close attention, to what we see visually, and that's important. I mean, what we do speaks an awful lot louder than what we say.
Mm.
We just have to be able to be that observant. And when you have a staff, you have the opportunity to do that, but you have to discuss with your people what we mean by mental wellness.
Mhm.
And does and the whole idea behind the identifying that as a group, is critical because that person, we don't know, what the person comes to the rink with, whether it's a young player coming from home, or a young person who went from home to school and then to the rink. We don't know what happened in their day. And that's why I suggested that collaboration is really important. And they can't come to what we would call discretionary time. They've chosen to play hockey, or it is their job. We can't expect them to come to the rink and not bring their day with them.
Hmm.
And so, with that being said, being vulnerable myself, I think is important. Making sure that, if I were to say in front of the room, guys, I don't know about you, but I didn't sleep last night. I'm struggling. You know what? We're going to go for 20 minutes today, and that's it. We're not skating long, or we'll come in and say, you know what, guys, let's do half hour of dry land today. We're not going to skate today.
Yeah.
Or say, you know what, fellas, tape your sticks, sit and visit with each other for a while, and we'll come back tomorrow and hit it hard tomorrow, or come back tonight. We always have a morning skate usually on game days, although that's becoming more of a dinosaur, which I think is right. So we'd always come in and say, guys, it's not optional today. We're all going on. Or guys, it's optional today, and I don't go on the ice.
Yes.
If I go on the ice, they're going to expect, well, I got to go out because
Yeah.
coach is out there. Da, da. That's all sort of a function of that timing, of that feel, and also having the ability to be transparent yourself,
Hmm.
feel in front of them,
Hmm.
walk the walk with them. They're not alone doing this. I feel just like you do. And I think that's important because you now integrate into being part of this ecosystem,
Hmm.
of this team that
Hmm.
will it ultimately and undeniably do something special.
You talk about gratitude circles or gratitude, what do you call them? Huddles,
Oh,
gratitude
yep,
huddles.
yep,
That's a wonderful phrase because to me, I have an expression says from grateful to great.
yep.
The greatest, the best athletes that I work with, the best teams that I work with, and John, I think you'll agree with this. They seem to have this gratefulness factor. They're not constantly looking what they can get. What can I get? More ice time, more this, more that. Coach, how can I give? And I'm wondering how you use that, and can you help us understand maybe it's something we could use in our coaching?
Sure. I think the bottom line is to stay out of it. Let them have the moment. You might set it up some way. We're going to the Children's Hospital on Thursday. The forwards, or this line you guys meet, this line you guys meet, the defenseman you meet here. Just talk about how you can maybe make that a better experience, for the kids that you'll see, because we're going to 4 different hospitals, and we're going to spread ourselves out. I think things like that are important. Really, the community engagement is a real good opportunity to understand the value of gratitude, and to be able to express how fortunate they feel with each other, prior to maybe even a larger group talk, if you will. But I think the community events are really important to be able to do that. But even if it's not, John, if it's and Jerry, if it's just talking amongst themselves as a group, just say, guys, you got 20 minutes to sit and just talk about what you value today. How your family is doing. How can we show more gratitude to officials on the ice? How do we show more gratitude to the people in the concession? Just huddle up and discuss what you believe to be important outside of you, which is inclusive of the rest of the population. And we've found that that's important because when you talk about mental health and wellness, um, it really is important to recognize that. And I'm a senior advisor for a group called Hone Athletics, and the whole idea there is to understand that people that might have that difficulty, that sort of that mental health issue, find themselves more comfortable in a group setting.
Mm.
They come to the rink, they come to the court, they come to whatever the domain might be, but they feel better because they're surrounded by their teammates. They're surrounded by friends, and then sometimes there's competition within those friends, goalies wanting to play. I've got to move up from the second line to the first line, whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is you're there to share an experience together. And what happens oftentimes is that we want to know, and it's all completely anonymous, but coaches want to know who's having trouble today because I want to get to them. Well, the huddle and being anonymous prevents that. You don't single someone out now because of, if you single someone out, they become the problem. well, so and so is having some mental health issues and he's playing, or she's playing terribly. That's not what this is about. The whole idea behind Hone Athletics is to do a survey once or twice, once a week or by month, bi-weekly, and it goes to the coach anonymously with 7 stressors. One being relationships, another being fatigue, another being criticism, another being interpersonal relationships. There's 7 stressors there, and they just toggle on their phone where they land on the wheel. No numbers involved, and it might be look in the area of a 1 or 2. It might look like it's an 8 or 9, and it goes to the coach and the mental performance coach, and they look at that and they start to see trends. And that outlier might show up and you don't know who it is, but that's the mental performance coach's job. We
Mhm.
have a mental performance coach. We see a trend in fatigue really starting to dip. The players come to the rink. You see this fatigue starting to dip, and you say to the guys, you know what? We're not going to practice today.
Mhm.
We're going to do 50 minutes of video and you're going home to your families.
Mhm.
Or we're going to do, guys, we're going to watch a little bit of video, and then I want you to go into your breakout rooms and huddle up and talk about, what you saw in the video, and then what you're going to do when you go home today with your family. And so the individual that might emerge as an outlier and having real problems has complete access to the MPC, complete access to the coach anonymously, though. And the coach gets the opportunity to see the trend. If they were to name themselves, and we saw that outlier coming, the coach would be right there in front of that person's face,
Right.
looking to how to help
Mhm.
with all good intention. But it doesn't work because now that person has been singled out.
Yeah.
There's an unconscious bias that we all carry in certain moments in time, and it eliminates that. And then what you're able to do as a coach is use that as a toolbox to kind of work on your periodization, your schedule for the next month, for next year's planning, for example, because there are highs and lows in every sports season. And so we've found it very, very helpful. And the huddle up is a really good way for them to speak openly and honestly about how they're doing with people that actually care about them, that don't hold judgment over them, that have no authority over their court time, or their ice time or anything like that. And it just allows for that kind of that relationship that you want amongst them. At the end of the day, it's their dressing room. It's not mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have this bias that we all carry, right? So I'm driving to practice, someone cuts me off on the road.
Mm.
I got in a fight with my spouse. I'm in an argument with management about X, Y, and Z. I've had a really bad day. So I'm in a bad mood at practice today, right? Then our player shows up and we don't know what's happened to them and they're having a bad day at practice and we just assume we jump to like, oh, they don't care, they're not committed, whatever. And so this type of insight is so important because if you see someone struggling between a tool like Hone and then also the conversation that you have with them when they come into your office and say, I'm struggling with this, or you know what, my wife moved out, we're having some problems, or my kid's sick and I'm not getting any sleep at night. Like it's a whole different lens to look at that player's performance. And instead of going, come on, Jimmy, going, Jim, I know you're going through a lot. You doing okay? You need off. See if you can give me a bit more. I know you got a little more in you, even though you're not going to be at your best today. And that fosters that trust, that fosters that connection, that fosters all these things because in sport, we're told, hold it in, don't share it, don't tell, right? Because it's tough. And hockey being one of the toughest sports of all, it's hard for people to share that. But yet all those things, to go back to your thing, happiness is a competitive advantage, and therefore sadness, stress, anxiety out off the ice is a disadvantage, right? And so the more we know, the better we can coach.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the juxtaposition between people with Jerry's skill and talent and the coach who doesn't have to be a psychotherapist. You
Right.
don't have to be a psychotherapist to be an excellent coach, or work with people that are having just those moments that are hard. It helps to have someone there. It helps have someone that can help you sort of dissect the situation and give you meaning to what's going on with the group, potentially an individual. But boy, the bottom line is what you have to be is empathetic,
Hmm.
and recognize, I'm having a bad day. I can't imagine what the gals are going through.
Hmm.
But the bottom line is that is the difference between, I think, high performance and falling short. I
Yeah.
really do. I think high performance, you can call things the program of excellence like they do in Canada, or, which is not the program of just about, not the program of maybe, or not the program of next time. It's the program of excellence. But
Yeah.
excellence is what it means to you.
Yeah.
And we can map that out and I can provide feedback. But all I want is just your very best performance. And we are here as a coaching staff to do anything we can to help this young lady achieve something excellent.
Hmm.
That's the bottom line. And when you do that, after the equal sign, you will see performance that is relative to winning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is critical. So that interaction is important. And as soon as you add humanity to your coaching,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
to me, you become a special leader.
Um,
Maybe that's winning. Maybe
That's
that
Absolutely.
that is the, Jerry.
Yeah.
That is the win, isn't it?
that,
I think
that is the win.
I think I read on one of your
Yeah.
podcasts that a clear conscience is a soft pillow.
I was just thinking that. It's so funny.
Yeah.
That was Mark Gottfried said that. And I think that was a John Wooden said that to him. The
Yeah.
softest pillow is a clear conscience. It's
Hmm.
so funny you said that because I was going to ask you that. Like, it sounds like after Vancouver, maybe your pillow wasn't so soft and you're like, well, what could I do better? But in, the Rangers and Edmonton and everything, you know, how did your when you lost these jobs, right?
Mhm.
And we've said to every professional coach on here, right? You signed up for a profession where you knew you were going to get fired. Like bankers don't do that and lawyers don't do that. Was the pillow soft? Like, did you leave saying, like, you know what, I was the best version of myself, and sometimes it just doesn't work out?
Uh, Definitely not in It was in Vancouver. It took time though. It took
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
That took a while. My first NHL opportunity, and I'd had some success, and I had other teams in the NHL that were talking to me about their head coaching position, and I thought, I'd arrived.
Hmm.
Great, super. And when people say you made it, I started asking myself, well, what is it?
Hmm.
It is not making it. It is not being somewhere. It is making a difference in other people's lives. That's
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
That is it. And it took me a while. And I remember doing a speaking engagement in Saskatchewan in Canada, and I think it was a coaching certification program.
Hmm.
And after the seminar, there was an audit of the delegates
Hmm.
on how they felt and rated each presentation. And I was fortunate enough to get fives across the board, except for one, and it
Hmm.
was one. And he had comments. The person had comments, and it said, "Tom needs to get over the Vancouver Canuck situation."
Hmm.
Was watching. I made references to it. I tried to make it jovial and humorous, and he could tell that I was still hurting. This was a year later.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
thought to myself, thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I was so grateful.
Yeah.
And I went back to Hockey Canada for 2 years after that. And then Glenn Sather hired me to come to New York. And interestingly enough, I I I had fun. I enjoyed New York. My wife and kids had a great time. We did pretty well. Made the playoffs for the first time in 7 years for 4 years. Was nominated Coach of the Year in the NHL one year. Um, and I got let go. And the circumstances there are another podcast, but very,
Hmm.
very, very interesting learning for sure.
Hmm.
But Glenn was great. Glenn was great. He said, "Tom, I'm sorry." He said, "It's come to this. It's
Hmm.
time." I said, "Okay, no problem." And I slept like a baby.
Hmm.
In Edmonton, same thing. I coached to my values. We had a young team. I was trying to protect very good young players from, you may or may not know that, and you know this, Jerry, but the away team has to put their players on the ice first. The home team does what they want to do, so it's line matching, John. You know that.
Hmm.
I was afraid to put Ryan Nugent Hopkins and Jordan Eberle and Taylor Hall out on the ice against David Backes and these monsters, and so I played them less. And at
Hmm.
home, I could play them because I had last change. But it started to become a problem because we were in Edmonton. We were really trying to sell hope. They had missed the playoffs for numerous years, and I was the coach to bring these kids to the sort of to the next level. And I lost my job. I thought, nope, you did fine. You coached exactly how you thought you should. You believed in making sure these kids would have a lifetime in the game. And so I that was a clear conscience. I had no problem with that, at all. And
Hmm.
So,
yeah, it's one of those things that you learn and evolve it ourselves. And I think you've got to put yourself in a position to learn.
so I grew up in New York, watching the Rangers play at Madison Square Garden for 90 cents a game. Tells you how old I might be. And the Montreal Canadiens would come in there and just completely crush us all the time.
Yeah.
So I grew up at the age of 10 watching hockey and thinking Canada is just amazing. The Canadians, just what hockey? That's hockey. Hockey is Canada. Canada's hockey. You worked in the CHL, the Canada Hockey League, Canadian
Mhm.
Hockey League. And what most people probably don't know is that I think you still hold the highest all-time winning percentage of anybody in that league. And we're talking about like 101 victories versus 37 losses, perhaps. That's amazing to me. And the NHL, so that's Canada. It's a tough place, and now you go to the NHL. What was different for you, if anything, when you went from the CHL NHL? Am I missing something there, or maybe you could address that?
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me, Jerry, was that, and people say, how did you get to be a head coach in the NHL? And I tell them the story. I said, all I ever tried to do was be really, really good where I was. My aspirations were not necessarily the NHL. My aspirations, quite honestly, and I wrote this down when I was going to the University of North Dakota. I wrote down that I was 20 years old at the time. I wanted to be worth $500,000. I wanted to be married with children. I wanted to be in good physical and mental condition. I wanted to attend church regularly. I tell people I drive by the church regularly. Once in a while, I'll stop in and do my thing. And my last one was coach Canada's national team in the Olympic Games. I was 20.
Wow.
When I was 37, I coached in Lillehammer.
Hmm.
That's how I got to the NHL.
Yeah.
Wherever I was along the way, whether it was Kamloops, whether it was it was always in the moment. I had to be the very best I could be for those people that I was working with, for, but with the players. I had to be the very best I could be and making it an experience like they would never forget. I had to make the rink a destination. And so when they asked me how did you get to the NHL, I said because I really tried hard to be good where I was. I didn't look so far down the runway that I forgot where I was. I had goals for sure, but and so the difference for me was not so much um, my approach. It was putting myself in a position to learn as much as I could, as quickly as possible, stay humble, ask questions, um, learn not to take yourself so seriously, enjoy the moment, and be okay with being seen enjoying the moment and that interaction. That's what was important to me. But in Canada, you, as the saying goes, we grow up wearing skates before we walk. Um, the world has caught up, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. The world has caught up, and we have no gender specificity any longer when it comes to playing hockey. Everyone can play, and that's important. And I like the fact that Canada is called the motherland or whatever it is, but I love the fact more that we had an impact on the world to the point where they play hockey extremely well and as good, if not better, than Canada. I think that's a gift to the world.
Love it. I love it. Well, What an amazing conversation, Tom. We didn't even get into your time as CEO of Hockey Canada and what you brought to that, because I think that's almost a whole other conversation at this point. And I imagine that position is like, I was going to say herding cats, but it's probably like herding cats and squirrels, like the same thing, just
Oh,
crazy.
John.
Um, so that was wonderful, and I just love how you kind of tied that all together because I think so many coaches, young coaches, they want to skip the steps. They don't want to get the mud on their face. They just want to, well, my aspiration is to be an NCAA Division One head coach. Well, what are you going to do to get there? And it's sort of like this entitlement to skip steps. I think sometimes, especially by former players, well, I played here, therefore I should skip all these steps. And yet it's in each of those steps and being where your feet are and embracing every learning opportunity that prepares you to be an NHL head coach, to coach your national team in Olympics. Like if you skip steps, you will be exposed eventually.
No question. No
Yeah.
question. That's a great comment. 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Tom, thanks for this. Just tell people maybe how they can connect with Hone Athletics and find you and all that sort of stuff, and then if you have any final thought for all our coaches and everyone listening here.
Okay. Um, First of all, honeathletics.com. Pretty simple. It is a mental health and wellness app, but it also is identified with athletics, but it's also got a work-life component to it now that is growing steadily. So it's quite innovative. It's quite good, and it gives leaders the tools to take the temperature of their team and maximize human potential to the point where the excellence is achieved at the very least. And the only thing I would say, I guess two things: be a great ancestor, and whatever you do, don't be a player's last coach.
Mm. Amen. Amen to that. Tom, thanks so much for being on the Way of Champions. It was absolutely wonderful conversation.
My privilege. Thanks very much, fellas.
Thank
Jerry, that was a full hour of leading with love right there, wasn't it?
Boy, I could have talked to him forever. Uh,
Yeah.
just a genuine, again, we come right back to it, genuine, authentic, vulnerable, talking about his firings, talking about he could have done better here or there. He's right there demonstrating what it's like to be an amazing coach, an extraordinary coach, without doing any coaching, just being himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I just, I'm always so humbled and impressed by people like him, right? Coached Canada hockey to a silver medal in the Olympics, right? So the most famous hockey nation on earth, NHL head coach, and yet here he is listening to our podcast, getting better, still giving back to the game, and just I'm always just so so appreciative of that, but
grateful.
also, it's like the people who are at the very top are the ones who are still the most curious. And it's the people below that level who get stuck in the ego of like,
Yeah.
I got it all. I
I
have
know it.
nothing left to
Yep, I've
learn.
got all the answers. I know it, and what have you. Yeah, the lifelong, send me a lifelong learner anytime,
Yeah.
because that's how I'm going to learn as well. And and you're absolutely right. The greatest teams, the greatest coaches I've ever had the honor of working with, have all been lifelong learners. Steve Kerr being a perfect example, who will be there. I'm amazed sometimes that he's really listening to what I have to say.
Hmm.
But you know, that's the nature of
Hmm.
greatness, is to
Hmm.
be open,
Hmm.
receptive, to be humble. Certainly, he had a lot of humility going, and we see it every single time. I mean, when we look at Scott Allen, the same thing,
Hmm.
interviewing him, no matter who we have on here, Mike Potenza. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I think what we should do, and I don't kind of mean this, but maybe we should have someone who's the opposite, and just see how that would go. Someone who has all the answers, someone who is not humble, and as a comparison. and talk about how, gee, that was a challenge. That was difficult. And but anyway, I know we're not going to do that,
Well, we
but
all meet those people every day in our lives, right?
yeah, we
Who
have enough of that for
we have
sure.
enough of
Yeah, yeah,
that. Yeah, I mean, I just, just like you said, the humility, losing the job in Vancouver and talking to players and saying,
yeah,
"Hey, maybe you're ahead of your time,"
yeah,
but the humility to say, "Wow, I did all these things, but I didn't get to know them well enough," right? And then to bring that into the next job, with the Rangers and saying, "If I
yeah,
can connect better," and even though we didn't win the Stanley Cup, right? We got back
yeah,
to the playoffs, we made the conference
right.
semifinal, we did this, but in that moment, like when I lose my job, when the players say those are my best years in the rink, I
Yeah,
loved
yeah,
coming to work every day.
yeah,
That's a win. That's his definition of winning. That was
yeah.
awesome.
We didn't quite get to the essence of one of my questions, and I'm just wondering what he. I didn't want to take up more time with it. It wasn't that important. Uh, but the essence of this idea of he was such a successful Canadian coach, successful on the scoreboard, I'm talking about.
Hmm.
He was always successful in our terms of success and winning. Uh, and I'm wondering when he got to the NHL, the Canadians are not giving away anything to to the Americans in terms of hockey, but when he got to the NHL, I'm wondering what was it that became all of a sudden different that he could he not create that within that environment or I don't know. I'm not
I mean,
sure.
it's different, right? Like Scott Allen talked about that with, in the CHL, in the ECHL, all your players are working to get to the NHL. So it's a
Yeah.
different player
Yeah.
versus the
Yeah.
multi-million dollar
Yeah,
player
I
who's
see.
already
I
made
get.
it.
Yeah. Good
It's
point.
it's just
Yeah.
different.
Yeah,
But
good point.
anyway, great
Yeah.
conversation. Again,
Yeah.
honeathletics.com is where you can learn
But
more about the
let's
work
do
that they
that.
do.
Let's do that Hone interview. I think
Yeah,
that would be really
we'll do that.
wonderful.
We'll do
Yeah.
that as well. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, everyone, thanks to Sprocket Sports. Thanks to all of our Patreon podcast champion supporters. And thank you again to Tom and everyone for listening and sharing. And one of the best things you can do if you haven't already, just subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to and know that this is going to pop into your podcast feed every week, which helps us, but also helps you so you don't miss something that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily looked up. But you get a
Yeah.
guy like Tom Renney or Scott Allen
Yeah.
or Mike Potenza
Yeah.
and go. So
Yeah.
thanks for listening, everyone. Your influence is never neutral, so go out there this week, use it for good. Never underestimate the impact of it, and we'll see you again next week, everyone.
Thank you.